In 1983, as Michael Jackson flew high on the success of Thriller, 47 million Americans tuned in to see his first ever on-stage solo performance of Billie Jean at a concert celebrating 25 years of Motown. Now his popularity was about to go into orbit.
I'll probably remember that moment to the day I die. The place was full of, ex-Motown stars, and they just went balmy when he did that backwards walk. I mean, it was just a magical moment in time.
It became the seminal moment of his television career. That night, he crossed over into a whole new audience.
The moonwalk was a dance that the kids were doing on the streets. And Michael came along later, and he had a guy by the name of Jeffrey Daniels to teach him to do the moonwalk. And Jeffrey taught him to do the moonwalk, and he was good at it. And when he did it, everybody saw it and just thought this was the most wonderful thing they had ever seen, not really knowing it was a dance that was already out there.
The backslide is actually supposed to be like if you were to be walking forward and suddenly you're on an escalator, and as you're walking forward, this escalator is now pulling you backwards as you're continuing to walk forward. That's the illusion of the backslide. And the moonwalk is that you're actually walking, but the ground is pulling you back. And if you can do it with that illusion, then you're doing it more or less looking like you're pulling yourself back, like your legs are tugging you back. It's not supposed to look that way.
From now on, Michael Jackson would be almost as well known for his stage persona as for his singing.
I remember I saw him in Japan during the history tour. I mean, he shot up from the bottom of the stage and landed on the stage and just stood there. And people are crying and screaming, and he hasn't even moved yet. He hasn't even moved, and they're crying and screaming. He reaches up for his sunglasses, and the screen goes up to another pitch. He slowly takes his glasses off. The screen goes to a higher pitch. He tucks them away and stands for a while longer. By the time the music starts, the audience is pretty much exhausted, and he hasn't even done nothing yet. You gotta show them that you're really not scared.
He was just unbelievable as a performer. You could look up to the last row in the stadium and see people standing up and screaming and waving, and you just knew he was connecting in a way that you just don't see in entertainment. But when you're talking up to 70,000 people in a stadium and you're communicating one-on-one, and that person in the stadium believes that Michael is talking to him or to her, not to just this mass, that's where the magic comes with Michael Jackson.
When you are doing the very best you can do at that particular moment with a lot of people watching, and that kind of pressure that not many people understand is on you, every second has to be in the moment. You don't have time for the regrets of the past or the fear of the future. You are there. It's right now. It's when I move my head like this, when I do this, when somebody looks, it's there. It's when the music is going like that, and you go. You just go there.
I see him so into the moment and so into what's going on, and so into that communication thing with his fans, and just that's where I see Michael Jackson alive and happy.
In 1984, Michael and his brothers signed a deal with Pepsi as sponsors of their first tour together for 3 years. But while filming a commercial for the drinks company, Michael's hair caught fire and he was rushed to hospital with burns to his scalp. Though he returned to tour with his brothers, from that point, tragedy and controversy would never be far behind. 1987 saw the release of Bad, Jackson's final collaboration with Quincy Jones. A July tour of the UK resulted in 5 nights sold out at Wembley as fans flocked to see pop's most unlikely bad boy. The album formed a quarter of all record sales in Britain during its first week of release, reaching a total of 20 million at the time, but its critical reception did not match that of Thriller.
By the third record, that he had a studio alongside the room that Quincy was working in, and he was putting his own ideas on tape. And then his, what do I want to say, his confidence in his ideas was expanding incredibly. And his need, his desire to put them out and have them heard.
If Jackson's musical ideas were rapidly expanding, so were his plans for increasingly elaborate and expensive live shows.
And, you know, we created the biggest tour ever that will probably never, ever be surpassed, and that all came from Michael's vision.
He sees the entire thing. He knows exactly what he wants and exactly what he wants to do. And that's really expensive. It's up to his managers and his handlers to try to figure out how do we make this work financially. And the truth is that, you know, on Dangerous, it didn't work financially. He wanted it to be so perfect for his fans, and he wanted it just so that he was going to have to write a big check for it, and he did.
Big didn't mean anything. Bigger meant something. But biggest became, you know, the synonym around the office.
Michael had this idea to end Dangerous that he wanted to fly off the stage with a rocket strapped to his back. And we all looked at each other and just went, what? It worked. Somehow he pulled it off, and it was the most amazing ending to a show I have ever seen.
Jackson would never again reach such heights of popularity as tabloid stories about his private life began to proliferate.
I don't know any longer what the truth is about Michael Jackson and what's purely fictitious.
Just stop dogging me around. What about sunrise? What about...
By the 1990s, Michael Jackson had reached the peak of his fame, but increasingly, his personal life would take center stage.
We talk about brand identities now in the record industry, and people say, you know, you've got to build a brand. Well, you know what? Michael Jackson was the first of those brands. Wherever you went on earth, everybody knew that brand. They could sing a song, or they saw the moonwalk, or they knew what he looked like. You know, they knew he was strange. They knew something. He was the greatest brand ever.
Part of that brand had always been Jackson's particular style of showmanship, including his choice of pets.
Of course, you have swans, and you have doves, and you have the fish, and you have the snakes, and you have the llamas, and you have the giraffes, and you have cougars, tigers. And we had Bubbles. Michael would always say, Bubbles, go to bed. And he would go in and he'd get his pajamas. He'd put his pajamas on. And after he puts his pajamas on, he'd go brush his teeth. Then after that, he goes, Bubbles, I said, which he hated to do, go to bed. Bubbles, I said, go to bed. And Bubbles was like, The trainers always had a problem with Bubbles because they came over one day and said, this monkey is wild. He can kill you. He can slap you and knock you out, which he could, of course. He had so much power behind his slap. However, Bubbles had this power, but it was very strange because we never knew how he would react. So when my brother Jermaine had his children, they were just infants. And we said, oh my, what's Bubbles gonna do, you guys? Don't let him touch it, don't. And he comes over and he sees the baby. And he comes in the room and he goes, ah! And he, like, his face goes, and he sees the baby.